The flicker of the single white pillar candle cast long, trembling shadows across the unrolled architectural blueprints on the speckled granite of the kitchen island. The neighborhood power grid had failed 22 minutes ago, plunging the entire block into a heavy, suffocating blackness. The silence inside the house felt denser than the storm battering the windows outside. I sat perfectly still on the wooden bar stool, my back to the dark hallway, the fabric of my light blue button-down shirt pulled slightly across my shoulders as I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold stone. Across the narrow counter, Freya offered a soft, tired smile. She wore an oversized gray cable-knit sweater, the thick wool pulled tight around her frame like armor. The golden light from the wick caught the white knuckle grip she had on a drafting pencil, illuminating the deep, dark exhaustion bracketing her eyes. "Thank you for coming over," she whispered. Her voice barely carried over the sound of the rain lashing against the kitchen glass. "Always happy to help." "Freya," I said, my voice pitched in that steady, cheerful tone I used for everyone. "It's no trouble at all. I was just reading anyway." I smiled. I was always smiling. It was the easiest way to make people comfortable, the simplest camouflage in the world. People looked at a smiling, 29-year-old guy in a slightly wrinkled Oxford shirt and saw a safe, ordinary neighbor. They didn't see the threat assessment protocols running in the background. Right now, beneath my pleasant expression, my mind was executing a cold, rapid triage. 15 minutes ago, my phone had buzzed with a text from her. "Can you come over? Use the back door. Please don't turn on your flashlight." I hadn't asked questions. I had simply stepped out into the freezing rain, crossed the wet grass separating our property lines, and slipped quietly through her rear entrance. Now, looking at the faint, uncontrollable tremor in her fingers as she rested her hand near the base of the candle, the coiled spring of repressed anger in my chest pulled one notch tighter. Someone was making her feel hunted in her own home. Freya let out a shaky exhale. Her gaze dropped from my face to the small flame between us, then to the half-finished pencil elevations on the blueprints. "I think someone has been standing by the fence line. I saw a shadow move near the azalea bushes just before the lights went out. I didn't want to sit in the dark alone, not with the municipal board presentation due on Monday. I can't even focus enough to finish these drafts." "You did the exact right thing," I said smoothly. I didn't turn my head toward the window. If there was a hostile observer outside, any sudden, aggressive movement from the neighbor would signal that she had alerted someone. "We'll just wait out the storm right here." She held my gaze for a long moment, the tension in her shoulders easing a fraction. It was a terrible thing to watch a highly competent woman, someone I knew to be a brilliant structural consultant, reduced to whispering in her own kitchen. She leaned over the wax and blew out the candle herself. The darkness swallowed us instantly. The sudden void of light forced my other senses to overcompensate. The sharp, acrid smell of extinguished smoke mixed with the damp, earthy scent of the rain. I could hear the steady, uneven rhythm of her breathing across the counter. "I don't want them to know exactly which room I'm in," she said quietly into the blackness. "Understood," I replied. I kept my voice light, entirely devoid of the lethal calculation currently mapping the physical perimeter of her property in my head. "I am a private intelligence contractor. My days consist of tracing encrypted digital footprints, running deep background checks for corporate security firms, and dismantling physical and digital threats before they ever reach a client's airspace. I do not fix gutters for a living, even if I play the part of the friendly guy next door who occasionally helps with yard work." I stood up slowly. The rubber soles of my boots made zero noise on her hardwood floor. "Stay right there, Freya. I'm just going to make sure the deadbolts are seated properly. Sometimes the weather stripping makes them stick. Callahan, you don't have to. I need to stretch my legs anyway," I said cheerfully, cutting off her protest with practiced ease. I navigated the dark house entirely by memory. When I reached the back door in the mudroom, I didn't turn on a light. I kept my profile angled away from the glass panels. I reached out and checked the heavy brass deadbolt. It was locked, secure, but when I ran my fingers along the lower frame of the door, illuminated only by the ambient, muddy gray light of the storm outside, I felt it before I saw it. A fresh, rough scuff mark against the white gloss paint, right near the lock cylinder. Someone had pressed a heavy boot against the frame, testing the door's give. My jaw clenched so hard a sharp pain shot up into my temples. The friendly neighbor persona vanished entirely in the dark. I pulled my phone from my pocket, shielding the screen's glow with my palm, and snapped a high-exposure photo of the scuff mark. Evidence. Time-stamped. Geotagged. I slipped the phone away and walked back into the kitchen, pasting the genial smile back on my face just as the neighborhood power grid surged. The overhead pendant lights flickered, hummed violently, and then blazed to life. Freya winced at the sudden brightness, raising a hand to shield her eyes. I noted the dark circles framing her features, the tight grip she maintained on the edge of the granite counter next to her scattered pencils. "Locks are perfectly fine," I said brightly, moving back to my stool. "But since your house is a bit drafty, and my fireplace is already going, why don't you come over to my place? It's much warmer. We can wait out the rest of the storm there. I have a generator backup." She hesitated. I could see the internal war playing out on her face, her fierce independence clashing against the very real fear that had been slowly hollowing her out, compounded by the stress of her looming deadline. "I hate being a burden, Callahan. You have your own evening, and I have these plans to finish." "Freya," I said, allowing my smile to soften into something slightly more real, slightly more grounded. "I made a ridiculous amount of coffee, and I have a 3-hour documentary on industrial logistics that I am desperately trying to avoid watching alone. You'd be doing me a massive favor." She let out a small, defeated sigh. The rigid, defensive posture she'd held all evening finally crumbled, her shoulders dropping visibly as she nodded. "Okay, let me grab my phone and a jacket." We crossed the yard quickly under the cover of my heavy golf umbrella. The rain was freezing, slicing through the air in sharp, chaotic sheets. I kept my body positioned slightly behind and to the left of hers, physically shielding her from the sightline of the alleyway and the azalea bushes without making it obvious. I didn't touch her. I didn't guide her by the waist. I simply acted as a moving, structural barrier. My house was vastly different from hers. Where her home was bright, airy, and filled with trailing plants, mine was effectively a fortified bunker disguised as a cozy craftsman build. The living room was anchored by a massive stone fireplace, casting a steady, deep orange glow across the heavy oak furniture, the thick wool rugs, and the reinforced window frames. "Sit anywhere," I told her, gesturing to the oversized leather sofa. "I'll get a blanket from the hall." When I returned from the linen closet, she was standing by the mantel, her arms wrapped tightly around her waist. She looked entirely out of place in my austere, controlled environment, bringing a quiet, fragile grace into the room. I pressed my jaw together, forcing my breathing to remain even, and handed her the folded wool throw. "Thank you, Callahan," she said, wrapping it around her shoulders like a shield. She stared directly into the flames, the orange light reflecting in her eyes. "It's Marcus, my former client." I sat down in the armchair opposite her, resting my elbows on my knees. I placed my phone face down on the coffee table between us, pushing it away. I gave her my absolute, undivided attention. No performance, no cheerful deflections. "The commercial real estate developer?" I asked quietly. She nodded, her voice tight, brittle. "He started sending messages a few weeks ago. At first, it was just asking for late-night revisions on the structural designs. Then it became personal, comments about my appearance. When I told him I wouldn't work with him anymore and transferred his account to a colleague, the texts escalated." She paused. "Tonight, right before the power went out, he sent a message saying he knew I was home alone. He described the sweater I was wearing an hour ago. I didn't react visibly. Internally, I had already initiated a mental target package on Marcus Vance. I knew his firm. By tomorrow morning, I would know his financials, his digital habits, his encrypted cloud storage, and his precise GPS location history." "I have the messages," she said, pulling her phone from her coat pocket. She held it out like it was a live explosive. "I didn't want to go to the police because he hasn't explicitly threatened violence. He's careful. He frames it as checking in. I know how the system works. They'll just tell me it's a civil matter." "You aren't hysterical. You are recognizing a textbook pattern of boundary violations," I said evenly. I reached out and took the phone from her hand. My fingers briefly brushed hers. The contact was functional, lasting barely a second, but a sudden stillness settled over me, anchoring the chaotic anger in my mind to a singular, protective purpose. "May I?" I woke the screen. 34 messages in 3 days. The progression was standard predator psychology. entitlement, grievance, assumed intimacy, and finally, active surveillance. Freya, I do some background consulting and data security for corporate risk management, I said. I have secure, air-gapped storage servers here in the house. If you're comfortable with it, I can extract these messages, scrub the metadata, and compile a formal chain of custody log. If we ever need to file a police report, we hand them a pristine, legally undeniable file. No gaps for his lawyers to exploit. She looked at me, surprise parting her lips. You can do that? Here? Give me exactly 2 minutes? I said smoothly. I stood up, walked into my home office, and returned with a locked, waterproof Pelican case. I set it on the solid oak coffee table and popped the heavy metal latches. Freya watched as I pulled out a heavy, rubberized field laptop and a small metal device no larger than a deck of cards. This is a hardware write blocker, I explained, keeping my voice at a low, steady cadence. I connected her phone to the device via a specialized cable, then plugged the device into my terminal. It physically prevents my operating system from altering a single byte of data on your phone. We pull a SHA-256 hash of the data before and after the extraction. It makes the evidence legally bulletproof. I kept the technical explanation brief, giving her just enough detail to anchor her racing mind to concrete facts. I looked up from the glowing screen. The sheer, boring bureaucracy of my forensic process was acting as a grounding wire for her terror. I devoted exactly 90 seconds to checking the network traffic around her house. I ran a quick, passive scan of open Wi-Fi access points in the immediate vicinity using a secondary antenna, looking for newly connected MAC addresses. Nothing active right now. All done, I said, safely disconnecting her phone and handing it back. Your data is locked down in a military-grade encrypted vault. He can't touch it. She let out a long breath, leaning back against the leather cushions. I feel so stupid for letting this get to me. I have that massive presentation for the municipal planning board on Monday morning. I shouldn't be hiding in the dark instead of finishing my elevations. Vance exploited a professional boundary. That is a failure of his ethics, not your awareness, I said, closing the laptop with a solid click. I stood up. Wait right here. I grabbed my umbrella and crossed back through the freezing rain to her house. 3 minutes later, I returned carrying her waterproof portfolio tube, her drafting pencils, and her rolled blueprints. I set up a heavy drafting board on my large dining table. From my office, I retrieved a high CRI architect's lamp, clamped it to the edge of the board, and ran the heavy power cord directly to my uninterruptible power supply in the corner. The generator provides clean sine wave power, I told her, clicking the lamp on. A perfect, brilliant circle of white light hit the drafting paper. The light won't flicker, and the voltage won't drop. You can finish your elevations right here. You are completely off the grid. She walked over to the table, looking at the meticulous setup, then at me. The tension finally left her shoulders, replaced by a fierce, focused energy. She sat down, unrolled the blueprints, and picked up a pencil. For the next few hours, the storm raged outside, throwing branches against the siding, but the house remained a fortress. I stayed in the armchair, reviewing actual case files on my terminal, allowing the silence to stretch. I didn't force conversation. I simply remained present while she worked. Every time she shifted, every time she paused to stretch her neck, I noticed. When she began to rub her left temple, I quietly got up, retrieved a glass of water and 2 ibuprofen from the kitchen, and placed them on the coaster near her elbow without a single word. You're very observant, she noted quietly. Occupational habit, I replied with a warm smile, returning to my screen. By 2 a.m., sheer physiological exhaustion finally claimed her. She fell asleep, curled on the sofa, her finished sketches safely rolled back into the tube on the table. The firelight cast a gentle, rhythmic glow over her features. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the monitors on my desk. I had set up a digital geofence alert around our block, tapping into publicly available traffic camera feeds. Before I finally leaned back to rest my eyes, I walked into the hallway and switched on the small amber nightlight near the bathroom. I left the light on for her. A silent, practical signal that if she woke up in a strange house, she wasn't navigating the dark alone. The next morning broke clear, cold, and blindingly bright. I was already standing at the kitchen counter, drafting a formal threat assessment protocol on a legal pad. When Freya walked in, she looked rested, her hair slightly tangled, the wool blanket draped over her shoulders. "Morning," I said brightly, pouring her a cup of coffee exactly the way she had mentioned liking it 3 weeks ago. "Black. 1 sugar. You remembered," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug. "I have a good memory for the important things," I said, keeping my tone light. Before she could take a sip, my burner phone vibrated aggressively on the counter. It was a secure alert from an automated OSINT scraping tool I had left running in the background overnight. I picked it up, my smile remaining firmly in place as I read the notification banner. Alert triggered. New audio file uploaded to public cloud directory linked to target M. Vance. Geotag match. Target location. "Excuse me 1 second, I said cheerfully. I stepped into my home office and closed the solid core door behind me. The smile dropped instantly. My face went completely flat, the muscles in my jaw locking. I pulled up the file on my secure terminal. It was an audio recording. I hit play. The sound was grainy, filled with the static hiss of cheap compression. But the voices were unmistakable. It was Freya, humming quietly to herself. Then, the sound of water running into a kettle, the clatter of ceramic. It was a recording from inside her kitchen. The timestamp indicated it had been captured yesterday afternoon, hours before the storm. The cold calculation in my chest turned into something resembling a localized seismic event. Marcus hadn't just been standing by the fence line. He had managed to place a remote listening device inside her home, most likely a cheap, battery-operated Wi-Fi bug dropped behind an appliance when she had a contractor in to fix her HVAC system last week. I stopped the recording. I took 3 deep, mechanically controlled breaths. I had to manage the release of this information perfectly. If I panicked, she would panic. I walked back into the living room. Freya was standing by the large front window, looking out at her house across the lawn. "Freya," I said softly. She turned, reading the shift in my posture immediately. The cheerful neighbor was entirely gone. "What is it?" "I need you to listen to me carefully, and I need you to know, with absolute certainty, that you are completely safe right now," I said. My voice dropped an octave, losing all its bouncy inflection, taking on the heavy, measured cadence of a crisis negotiator. I ran a passive sweep of public directories this morning. Marcus uploaded an audio file to a cloud server. It's a recording of you in your kitchen. The mug slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the hardwood floor, dark coffee splashing across the rugs and her bare feet. She backed away from the mess. She drew in a sharp, shaky exhale, her hands rising to grip the edges of the wool blanket. "Inside? He was inside my house?" She began to shake. It wasn't a small tremor this time. It was a violent, full-body physiological response. The violation of her sanctuary was a physical blow. I stepped forward, moving slowly, predictably, keeping my hands visible. "Freya, look at me." She couldn't. Her eyes were darting frantically around my living room, as if expecting cameras hidden in my walls. "He is not listening here," I said. My voice was an anchor dropping into a violent sea. I closed the distance between us. I didn't reach for her waist. I didn't try to stroke her hair. I simply stood in front of her and opened my arms, offering a structural barrier against the world. She stepped into it, burying her face against the solid wall of my chest. I wrapped my arms securely around her shoulders, holding her firmly, locking out the noise, the light, the threat. The physical contact wasn't an exploration. It was the deployment of a shield. The sudden, profound stillness of the room closed in around us. The chaos of her panic met the absolute, immovable bedrock of my control. I felt the tremor in her spine fight against my grip, and then, slowly, begin to surrender to it. The physical act acted as a grounding wire, transferring my stability directly into her nervous system. "I've got you," I murmured finally, my voice a steady vibration against her ear. "The device is in your house. My home is electromagnetically shielded. I have active jammers in the walls. Nothing gets in or out of this structure without my authorization. You are completely invisible right now." She let out a ragged, tearing exhale, her hands gripping the fabric of my shirt like she was falling from a great height. How do you know all this, Callahan? Who are you? I'm the guy who makes problems like Marcus Vance go away, I said quietly, resting my chin lightly on the top of her head. Legally. Permanently. If you give me permission, she pulled back just enough to look up at my face. The gentle, accommodating neighbor was gone, replaced by the tired, serious operative who understood exactly how ugly the mechanics of the world could be. Do it, she said. Her voice shook, but beneath the fear, I heard the steel of a woman deciding to fight back. The rest of Saturday was a masterclass in controlled demolition. I left Freya securely locked in my home with a fresh cup of tea and my iPad, which I had loaded with mindless Architectural Digest magazines. Then, I crossed the yard and entered her house. I used a handheld RF detector, sweeping the rooms methodically. I found the bug in under 12 minutes. It was a cheap, generic, voice-activated transmitter taped under the lip of the kitchen island. I photographed it in situ, then used a pair of tweezers to drop it into a signal-blocking Faraday bag. Chain of custody. I spent the next 3 hours changing every core cylinder in her external locks, upgrading them to high-security Medico hardware. I worked silently, the heavy metallic clicks of the deadbolts locking into place the only sound in the house. When I returned to my place, I went straight to my terminal. I did not confront Marcus with my fists. That was amateur hour. I used my specialized clearance. I traced the purchase receipt and the origin IP for the surveillance hardware from an unsecured cloud backup linked to his personal email account. From there, I cross-referenced the hardware's delivery date with the historical GPS data from his company's fleet management portal, a system his firm had carelessly left with default administrative credentials. The timeline was irrefutable. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a 60-page dossier. It proved not only the stalking, but also multiple violations of his firm's ethical conduct policies, misuse of corporate assets, and potential felony wiretapping. I was sitting at the dining table, organizing the final printed index, and sliding it into a heavy black binder, when my burner phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. I know who you are, Lee. You think a private contractor scares me? Keep out of my business. I stared at the glowing screen. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. He had run a background check on me. He knew my real profession. He was escalating. Freya walked into the room, carrying 2 fresh mugs of tea. She stopped when she saw my face. Everything okay? I looked at her. For a fraction of a second, the fear broke through my discipline. My world was dark, filled with secrets, liabilities, and people who held grudges. By bringing her into it, was I painting a permanent target on her back? My immediate instinct was to push her away, to isolate myself to keep her clean. I locked the screen on the phone and deliberately set it face down on the table. I forced a small, genuine smile. Everything is perfectly fine. The file is ready. We go to the precinct tomorrow morning. I refuse to let my internal damage dictate her safety. I would not pull away. I would finish the job. Monday morning. The local police precinct was loud, smelling of stale coffee, ozone from the copiers, and damp floorboards. I wore a sharp, tailored navy suit. My posture rigid, professional, projecting absolute authority. Freya stood beside me at the intake desk, wearing a structured trench coat, her finished portfolio tube tucked securely under one arm. She wasn't hiding behind me. She was standing with me. Detective Miller, a seasoned contact I had worked with on complex corporate fraud cases, looked at the massive black binder I placed on his scarred metal desk. Callahan, Miller sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Tell me this isn't another wild goose chase through corporate server logs. It's a fully documented felony wiretapping and harassment case. Detective, I said, my voice crisp, flat, and authoritative. Chain of custody is maintained on all physical and digital assets. The RF transmitter is in the evidence bag, attached to the spine. You have the purchase receipts from his personal cloud, cross-referenced with the GPS tracking from his fleet portal matching the suspect, Marcus Vance, directly to the victim's property. It's gift-wrapped. All you have to do is read the summary and execute the warrant. Miller opened the binder. He flipped through the first 3 pages, his eyebrows rising steadily toward his hairline. He looked at the meticulously organized tabs, the undeniable, crushing weight of measurable reality. Vance is a prominent commercial architect in this city, Miller warned. though his tone had shifted from dismissive to pure business. Vance is a liability who used company Wi-Fi to purchase illegal surveillance gear, I corrected calmly. The evidence is indisputable. The DA won't even need to blink. Just then, the heavy double doors of the precinct swung open. Marcus Vance walked in, accompanied by a man in an expensive suit, clearly a lawyer. Marcus had been summoned for an initial statement based on my preliminary digital filing the night before. Marcus spotted Freya standing by the desk. His eyes narrowed, an ugly, entitled sneer forming on his lips. He started walking directly toward her, his lawyer trailing a step behind. Freya, this is ridiculous. You're making a massive mistake, Marcus began, his voice loud, designed to intimidate her in a public space. I stepped smoothly between them. I didn't puff out my chest. I didn't raise my voice or clench my fists. I simply occupied the physical space, an immovable, professional barrier blocking his vector of approach. Mr. Vance, I said. My tone was polite. My smile was pleasant, and entirely, terrifyingly dead. You are currently within 10 feet of my client. Given the evidence of felony wiretapping detailed in the binder currently on Detective Miller's desk, I highly recommend you direct all communication through your counsel. Marcus stopped short. The arrogant sneer collapsed. The color drained from his face as his eyes darted from the sharp cut of my suit to the massive, tabbed binder dominating the detective's desk. His posture shrank, the blustering confidence instantly replaced by a pale, sickening panic. You have nothing, Marcus bluffed, but his voice cracked, lacking any real conviction. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I simply turned my back on him, the ultimate dismissal of a threat, and looked at Freya. I stepped aside, giving her the floor. Freya stepped forward, gripping her portfolio tube tightly. She didn't look at Marcus with fear. She looked at him with cold, clinical pity. Detective Miller, Freya said clearly, her voice echoing in the quiet room, commanding the attention of everyone present. I am ready to sign the formal complaint. She didn't look back at Marcus as he was quickly ushered into an interview room by the detective, his lawyer looking panicked. She walked to the desk, took the pen, and signed the paperwork with a steady hand. When we walked out of the precinct, the morning air was sharp, biting, and incredibly clean. The storm had finally passed, leaving the city washed bright. We stood on the sidewalk, the traffic bustling around us. He's done, I said quietly, adjusting the cuffs of my jacket. His firm will fire him by noon when the warrant hits their legal department. The emergency restraining order is active. It's over. You can go crush your presentation now. Freya looked at me, tapping the thick plastic of her portfolio tube. The deep, agonizing tension that had held her shoulders hostage for weeks was entirely gone. She looked lighter. She looked like herself again. Thank you, Callahan, she said. I nodded, feeling the familiar instinct to retreat. I reverted to my default, cheerful baseline. Anytime. If you need help finding a contractor to do a secondary sweep of the house, I know a few good people. I took a half step back, preparing to give her space. The job was done. The threat was neutralized. It was time for the contractor to fade back into the shadows of his shielded house. Callahan, she said, stopping my retreat with a single word. She reached into her trench coat pocket and pulled out a small, newly cut silver key. She held it out to me. I stared at it, the cheerful mask slipping completely. My hands stayed at my sides. Freya, you don't need to give me a spare. The new locks are secure. The threat is gone. I know, she said softly, stepping closer. She didn't push the key into my hand. She held it in the space between us, a clear, active choice, waiting for my response. I'm not giving it to you because I need a security guard. I'm giving it to you because I want my neighbor to come over for coffee tomorrow morning, through the front door, with the lights on. I looked at the key, then up at her face. I saw the absolute certainty in her eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was an invitation. I had spent my life building walls, managing risks, and anticipating the worst in people. I had convinced myself that my clinical competence was the only valuable thing I had to offer the world. I reached out. My hand closed over the key, the metal warm from her touch. I didn't pull her into a desperate embrace. I just held the key, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of an arrival. The wandering, the hypervigilance, the cold isolation, it all stopped right here on the sidewalk. I prefer my coffee black, I said quietly. I know, she smiled. The end. Closing thoughts. I learned that true safety isn't about building thicker walls or hiding from the world. It's about finding someone who stands steady when the storm hits and never asks you to face the dark alone. Real love isn't about dramatic rescues. It's about consistency, respect, and showing up with the right tools when it matters most. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.